much for that kind introduction. Before I go any further, though, Nick Burinitis is here today. Nick graduated last year. Nick is serving in our office in Freehold as an intern, and he has a bright future ahead of him in both public policy and politics, and we're just so glad to have him. So thank you, Nick, for your work in my office. Thank you for inviting me. It is a privilege to be here, and I'll give some opening comments and then go to any questions you might have, because I think that'll be the better part of it, because I think I want to know what's on your mind. You know, I've been in Congress now. I got elected in 1981. I first ran in 78. I do chair three different, and I think it's important. One of them is known as the Africa Global Health Global Human Rights Committee. It deals with human rights around the world. It deals with humanitarian issues all over the world, including in the United States. I also chair the China Commission and a group. Everybody knows what NATO is in terms of our common defense with Europe. Well, on the human rights side, there's a thing called the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and I'm the chairman of that commission as well. I also have put together and chair a number of what we call caucuses, member working groups. All of them arise out of unmet need in our district as well as across the country. And I put those together. One of them is on Alzheimer's, which is something your parents and grandparents, all of us are deeply concerned about. Obviously Alzheimer's, dementia, is one of the most devastating diseases on the planet. We have about 5 million cases, confirmed cases of Alzheimer's in our own country. So we need to do more to get to a cure, certainly get into a way of slowing its progression. So I formed that in the year 2000. And that's the same year I also formed another caucus on autism. You know, there are three jobs of a congressman, three basic jobs of a congressman. They're overlapping. And the first is the policy-making or law-making function. The work is intense. I actually have at least it's a matter of fact, I'm the author of more laws than everyone except one person in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm a very serious lawmaker. Sometimes it takes years to get a bill enacted. Sometimes it takes a year. But usually it's multi-year efforts before that bill actually becomes a law. And I have 3 bills that I expect within weeks to be out of the Senate. They've already passed the House. One of them is on human trafficking. If it becomes law, it'll be my 5th law on combating modern-day slavery, known as human trafficking, sex and labor trafficking. It is a problem right here in New Jersey, right here in Monmouth County, where women are turned into commodities for sale, and sadly, those women's and young women's lives, young girls' lives, are often ruined as a result. In the year 2000, I wrote a law called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. It is our landmark law to combat in every way possible through prosecutions, protection, rescues, those women and men, mostly women, that are sold into modern-day slavery. I don't know if any of you may have watched the show Smallville. 2 of the actresses in there have been complicit, allegedly, in a human trafficking scheme in New York. Well, they're prosecuting them under my law. It is very important to stop this terrible exploitation of women, this cruelty that is really growing still in its intensity and prevalence throughout the country. So the first job is the policy-making or law-making aspect of this job. The second is oversight. Once we pass a law, what happens? Does the executive branch faithfully, no matter who's in the White House, implement that law? Does it have glitches that need to be fixed? So oversight is very often not, people don't talk about it a lot, but I do oversight hearings all the time. I did one a week ago. It is a way of finding out how well or poorly are the laws that we enact being carried out. And if you find out they're not being carried out well, how do we fix it? The third job of a congressman, and Nick will have a say in some of this, he'll be working in our office in Freehold, is called constituent case work. When somebody, anyone in this room, a family member, contact us or the school and says, we need help on such and such, whether it be an adoption, something with a school board request for funding, whatever it might be, I'm able to go to town and work on their behalf as an advocate to try to resolve that problem. We've had, and we counted them up recently, and It startled me as well. We've had 90,000 individual casework problems that we have worked to resolve since I've been elected to office. We're aggressive about it. I believe that once somebody walks into my office or makes a phone call or sends an email, they have my and my staff's undivided attention, and we try to resolve their case. I often turn those cases into law. I'll give you one example that you might be familiar with. A few years back, a guy named Golden, David Golden, his son was abducted to Brazil. Well, I got involved in this case. Matter of fact, my wife and I were watching. He didn't live in my district, so he hadn't reached out to me really personally. But he was on a TV show, and he made a statement. He goes, "Will somebody please help me? They're holding my son hostage in Brazil." My wife turned to me and said, "I know he's not in your district. Give him a call." I called him that Saturday. By the next Saturday, I was in Brazil working on his case with him, meeting with members of the Brazilian Supreme Court and other people. I saw that our law, the United States law, was absolutely inadequate and infirm, and then wrote a law. I named it after David Goldman and Sean, his son, who is now safely here with him and with his father. It's called the Sean and David Goldman International Child Abduction Prevention and Return Act. Now that legislation means that we're helping all the others who have had abducted children. Some of the countries that are the worst and the most egregious violators of abduction, where they do not help return a child who was stolen, are Japan, Brazil, India, and unfortunately we have a case from a woman in Cranberry, right nearby in Mercer County, where her husband took off with her their two boys, didn't tell her, said he was going on a trip, took them, and she has not even been able to get in to see him. Her name is Bindu Phillips. I've had her testify at some of my hearings. I actually met with the Prime Minister of India and asked him to help resolve this case. It still remains unresolved. My hope is that our law, which has sanctions to it for any country that does not honor a quick return of a child who has been abducted, will be meted out against those countries that show this pattern of non-cooperation. Finally, and I can talk about a lot of specific issues, autism came out of casework. In 1997, a husband and wife from Brick, New Jersey, walked into my office and said, "We think we have a prevalence spike increase in our area of Brick with autism." And so I brought up the Centers for Disease Control and other responsible leaders and asked them to investigate. And all of a sudden they said, "Oh, wow, we have problems in other municipalities as well," because they do data calls as to prevalence in other municipalities. So I wrote a law, the Combating Autism Act, which is the law of our land now, that has taken the Centers for Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health, and put very serious money into combating autism, its prevalence, early intervention, and all the other things that really do make a difference. And we're going to get to the point where we can resolve this. There's a lot of research being done on how to increase the cognitive abilities of those who are dealing with autism, and it's going to happen. It's, in my opinion, a matter of when and not if, because the research dollars are being devoted to finding answers. Something all of you need to be concerned about, and really concerned about, is Lyme disease. I'm the chairman of the Lyme Disease Caucus in Congress. I formed it. It's a bipartisan caucus. And we know that we are now seeing a huge spike. I would say it's an epidemic in Lyme disease in New Jersey. Monmouth County is one of the most highly impacted municipal counties in the entire country. The estimates for the state is about 5,000 new cases, but that doesn't tell the story. The Centers for Disease Control says that they undercount the number of Lyme disease confirmations by a factor of 10. So it's 10 times higher. So in New Jersey, we're talking about 43,000 plus new cases of Lyme. I wrote an op-ed for the Esmond Park Press that ran on Sunday. If you get a chance, we have a copy of it, take a look at it. But the numbers are staggering. So I urge all of you to be very careful when you're out in the park, in your backyard. Put down the right kind of, I put down in my yard in Hamilton, a very environmentally safe way of killing ticks. It's called EcoSmart. It's good for dogs. It doesn't hurt anyone, people or pets, but it kills the tick. But really take seriously the risk if you're out, as you all will be, the summer months coming, if you do get bit by a tick. We do have in Monmouth County, it's called the Mosquito Control in Denton Falls, a great resource. You can Google it, or you can, if somebody has a tick, contact them. And we also have in our state, in Ocean County, the national organization is called Lyme Disease Association. Check out their website as well, because it's filled with information on how to prevent. If you get a tick on you, how to take it off, and then to be very, very aware what the symptoms are, because if you get it and don't catch it early, chronic Lyme is a very deleterious disease that you would have to deal with. My own daughter, she's 40, she got chronic Lyme, and it took 3 years or so of an aggressive intervention with antibiotics and the like to get rid of the bug called the spirochete. So I'm just asking you to be very, very aware of it and protect yourselves, protect your loved ones from this Lyme disease scourge, because it is a scourge. That's all I want to start off with. I have a lot on my sheet here, but I'd like to hear from you on any questions you have. I know one thing that you're all concerned about, and I will finish with this in my opening, is school safety. I am very encouraged by what school officials are doing to try to mitigate and to lessen the potential of a catastrophic event in all of our schools, in my district at least, because I've been out to several, taking all of these best practices and putting them into place. I would ask all of you, when you're on your social media, if something doesn't look right, or somebody's giving some early warning that something might be wrong here, tell the authorities, tell your teacher or principal, and let the right person know. Had that happened in Parkland, maybe something would have happened. If the FBI would have done its job in Parkland, I think we would have had a whole different outcome. Unfortunately, the easy access that some people have to weapons, if they have problems, they can then do very, very terrible things. So situational awareness can't be overstressed enough, because you might be the one who helps stop someone because you caught something an early sign. We do this with terrorism. If you see something that doesn't look right, say something. So I just encourage you, if you see something that doesn't look right, please say something there as well. On guns, I'm hoping that we'll get to a universal background check that gets rid of, because I voted for the Brady Law, which is our background check for the country. We have a very strong one here in New Jersey as well. But there is a loophole that needs to be closed. And that loophole has to do with the private sellers. Sometimes it's called the gun show loophole, but that doesn't really tell the story. Private sellers, if it's not their main business, they can sell guns, and the background check does not, I repeat, not have to be done on the person to whom they sell it to. There's a big unmet need for that needs to be closed. I'm a co-sponsor of a bill that would close it and say that anyone who's selling, there's some exceptions with family members giving a gun collection, for example, on down to another family member or something, but very, very tight, and it would make a difference, I believe. I've also, in 1994, had voted to ensure that like AR-15s and other so-called assault weapons were no longer sold in the United States. That bill had a 10-year shelf life. We call it a sunset provision, and it just ended after 10 years and has never been renewed. I'm also a co-sponsor of legislation to reinstate that provision. I do believe in the Second Amendment. There are people who want to protect themselves, go hunting, or target shooting. I believe that's totally legitimate. It's enshrined in the United States Constitution. But just like the First Amendment, freedom of speech is not absolute. You can't slander, you can't libel. There are a lot of exceptions that are done out of a common sense perspective. All of our constitutional amendments, I think, need to have reasonable conditionality to them based on what is happening in the real world. So my hope is that we will move on that legislation sooner rather than later. Your questions?
Congressman?
Yes.
Hey, I apologize for quickly jumping on, because I know you guys probably have some questions. But it's interesting, and I was hoping maybe you could help us understand something. Someone that you will appreciate, but I don't know if the students in here know who he was. Senator Alphonse D'Amato used to be identified as Senator Pothole, I believe. And it was a term that he took on himself. It was a very endearing term because he identified the importance of local issues as well as national issues. Am I correct in saying that, Congressman?
Very true. And
So I guess what I'm asking, though, is like, for yourself and also for Congress in general, you have a lot of legislation that you're talking about that is extraordinarily local, and at the same time, you're also working on a lot of legislation that is obviously impactful across the nation. How do you decide what you're going to pick up, and also, how does Congress decide what it's going to pick up?
that's a great question. I think part of it has to do with what you're exposed to. I'll give you an example. In the late 1990s, we became increasingly aware that there were large numbers of homeless veterans. The estimates were from 220,000 to 290,000 of our veterans on the streets on any given night. Well, I became chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, and I said, not on my watch is that going to continue. So I convened a whole group of hearings, heard from the experts. We had New Jersey veterans who were formerly homeless come and testify and tell their plight, what it was like to be, on drugs, alcohol, and many of them suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Despite the heavy cost, because it was a heavy cost for my law, I introduced the Homeless Veterans Assistance Act of 2001. It took a couple of years to get passed, but it became law. The numbers now, still too high, the numbers now are 40 to 50,000 veterans on the street on any given night. It was because we had a national strategy. We had a national effort to say, no more. These are honorably discharged men and women, and most of them are men, but there were women as well. We've got to go and reclaim them and bring them. We have a situation going on right here in New Jersey, and Lillian Berry, our freeholder, is leading the effort on this to provide a safe housing for about 100 homeless veterans, and working with a non-governmental organization known as Soldier On, which is a great group. They've done it elsewhere in the country, and we're looking to do that right nearby in Tinton Falls. So those kinds of things, you never solve it completely, but you provide protection for, and in this case, safe shelter, and then working on get those folks back into working, getting reconnected with their family, many of whom have severed that relationship, sometimes on their account, because they're homeless, they just leave. So what drives me is seeing, how do I decide? An unmet need, and knowing with the right kind of legislation and policy, sometimes just convincing the administrative branch to do something, get you where you want to be. I just jump in and work on a bill. The Lyme disease, I'll give you an example of how I got involved with Lyme. A woman named Pat Smith, no relation. She runs the Lyme Disease Association of America. She, in Wall Township, came up to me and she said, what are you doing about Lyme, Congressman? I said, nothing. We sat down, we had lunch, and that began my work in Lyme. I offered a piece of legislation 1 year later to ensure that the Department of Defense, because so many of our men and women, when they go on bivouac and they're, say, at Fort Dix, they're highly susceptible to ticks. They go back to wherever it is they're from, Illinois, wherever. They can't figure out why they've got brain fog and all these other things. They had no idea they were bit by a tick. So we did a military effort, which continues to this day, to combat Lyme. I also put in legislation a few years later to establish an advisory committee that would say, just like I did with autism, because I established IAC, it's a coordinating committee for autism. You got to have people who are from the community, from the research community as well, doctors and others who are actually treating. They got to be working on strategy. So we found out that if we put such a thing together, I started that in 1998. It wasn't until 2 years ago, that's how long it took, that we got this advisory committee approved, and we put it into what we call the 21st Century Cures Act. And that was controversial. After it passed the House, it went over to the Senate, and the Senate took it out. And thankfully, Kevin McCarthy, who's our majority leader, Republican leader in the U.S. House, his daughter had Lyme. And he told me years ago, they had gone to 19, he's from California, so it's not just the East Coast, 19 different doctors and got misdiagnosed. 19 of them. So I said, Kevin McCarthy, the Senate just took this out of the 21st Century Cures Act. You know what he said? That bill does not come back to the House unless that advisory committee with people who have Lyme on the committee are a part of it. One of the problems has been your government and mine, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, says that chronic Lyme doesn't exist. That it's a mere syndrome in your head. Even though the practitioners, the clinicians, and certainly the patients who don't catch it early know that it absolutely exists, and this terrible bug continues to proliferate throughout their body, particularly in the spinal cord and in the brain. And, then we had Kevin McCarthy who said the bill doesn't come back. The Senate receded to the House position, and it came back with that. And now Pat Smith, my friend who I met in 1992, she lives in Waltstill. She is on that commission, and what a difference that is making. Last 2 weeks ago, maybe it was 3 weeks ago, I met with Dr. Ben Beard, who's the head of the tick-borne diseases for the CDC. He's moving in our direction now, partly because the advisory committee has people who really know what's going on in the field, and it's making a difference. And you'll be protected because of this work. Again, all of us, I love the outdoors. I love, all my kids playing soccer, travel teams, all that kind of stuff. Always out in the field. Well, you got to do tick checks now, and do them vigorously to make sure, because they can be at your kneecaps before you know it. Moving up and finding a place to burrow in. So, but I choose it based on need that I come in contact with, constituent requests. A lot of the diseases that I work on, and I work on a lot of them, it was somebody who came to my office and said, Chris, could you do this? Here's what we're talking about. And of course, let me take a look. And then we work on it. I'll give you an example. Muscular dystrophy and Duchenne. There are 2 organizations, one here in Monmouth, Jar of Hope, and one in my hometown called Ryan's Quest. And they're striving to get money for Duchenne disease. Most of the little boys, and it's all little boys that get it, die an early death because this muscular dystrophy is 100% lethal. And I bet their kids, you just sit there and you have tears in your eyes. Well, about a month ago, I met with the chairman of less than a month ago, of the committee that writes the budget for the National Institutes of Health. And I'm asking for 10 million more. There's 34 million going into that budget for research. It's been straight line for like 5 years. It's like, come on, we need to get on this. And I brought both of the fathers, who run these organizations and the wives on behalf of their children. And we sat there in his office. His name is Tom Cole. He's chairman of the HHS Appropriations Committee. And we're shooting to get $10 million in the next year's budget for that. On Lyme, we got $5 million extra, which doesn't sound like a whole lot in federal, but through the Lyme caucus. We just agitated and said, we're not spending enough on Lyme disease. So most of it comes from a contact with somebody in our district. Because, I do represent you. That's what it's all about. That's why on casework we take it so seriously. You come to my office, you call, you email, no matter how you contact us, telephone, we're all ears. And Joe Schloter from Walt Township, right over there, Joe's our district director, and she and our staff will work overtime to try to resolve the case. And we don't always win, but we give it a very, very serious try, and it does happen. Thank you for that question. Yes.
So you clearly have a very solid plan about the local issues that you want to target. Naturally speaking, our political climate is changing very fast, especially with the direct Trump administration of states and cities. So based on your previous history, you said no to the recent GOP healthcare bill and the tax overhaul bill. So what is your plan in dealing with or even combating the agenda of the Trump administration over the next 4 years? And what specific issues do you think we need to be focused on in Congress as corporations?
Thank you for that question. Just for the record, the main reason why I voted against the repeal and replace, because there are serious and egregious flaws in Obamacare that have to be fixed. It's not affordable as advertised, and I know it even personally. My wife and I were put onto Obamacare. We are federal employees by design of the law. We were put on Obamacare, and and we hear this in our casework all the time, my premiums have doubled, our other aspects, the co-pays, the all-important deductible, at what point do you have to spend your own dollars before the insurance actually kicks in, has quadrupled. So we hear from so many people that the affordability issue didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And some of us said that while it was going through Congress. Now, the reason why I voted no was Medicaid. There was a big increase in Medicaid, which helps our poor and disabled persons, and there was an attempt to cut it by $839 billion, and I couldn't agree with that. There's just too many people in our district, in our state and country, who rely on that Medicaid dollar for their health care, including our seniors. 2 out of every 5 people, 2 out of every 5, in nursing homes have spent down to the point where they're on Medicaid now, and that Medicaid is paying for their nursing home bill. That's going to be 3 out of 5 soon, and then 4 out of 5 because of the baby boomers moving, demographically into that category. So I do try to look at issues independently. That's one thing I've done from the day I got elected. No matter who the president is, it's all a matter of the president proposes, and we then dispose of those recommendations, either up or down, or in a modified version. Every budget that has come up from a president since I've been elected, whether it be Bush or Clinton, was dead on arrival. It's a blueprint that we look at, no matter who's in power in the House or Senate, and then we start our own budget. And I think that's been a good thing. Because I think being close to the people means that on a lot of the social issues, especially diseases related, we walk right on that. We know it, we hear, eyes and ears, and we're able to try to get the budget right. I would hope that the tenor of Washington would change. I get attacked. I actually did an op-ed for Washington, the Esmond Park Press, a full year ago, and I have it with me if you want to see it. You can Google it and get it as well. But I pointed out that the people that are picketing my office every week, people who are sending the most crude and obscene attacks I've ever seen. I've been around a few years. I've been an opponent. I ran for Congress and lost the first time. I wouldn't think of using the 4-letter words and all the other things, but it gets worse than that. We've had 5 people, where we've had to go to the police and say, cease and desist. You come back to my office, you're getting arrested for what you did to Joe and to the women, because my office is all female in Freehold, for what you did. You threatened them. And I have 1 death threat. So, this is not games. And what I wrote in this op-ed was, the so-called dissidents are taking disagreement in a very, very dangerous direction. We should be able to disagree completely on something, shake hands and be civil about it, because that's what makes our country work. I have seen the opposite of it in many other countries in the world, where dictatorships and authoritarian rules, means that if you speak out, you're going to jail, like Cuba or several places, Russia right now, the People's Republic of China. They don't have democracies, and we'll keep our democracy as long as we protect the right to dissent, but dissent has to be done, I believe, in a civil fashion. And one of the things that I think Trump is doing really right, and that is what he's doing vis-a-vis Iran. I think we included an Iran speech with a handout for you today, but when the so-called comprehensive agreement, peace agreement, was put forward by President Obama, it is so flawed that in 8 years, January 2026, Iran can produce every nuclear weapon they could possibly want, and there's no sanctions. And anyone who thinks that Iran's going to become a democracy between now and then, they haven't over the last several decades. They're not going to, I believe, become a democracy. And they continually say death to Israel and death to the United States. And they're trying to build up the capacity and the capability to take a nuclear weapon, put it on top of a missile, and send it to Israel, places in Europe, and their dream is to be able to put one in the United States. That is an existential threat to our peace and our security. And the peace agreement, so-called, was so flawed that they're breaking it with impunity. And that's a problem. So he has at least called that out. I think we should renegotiate it, put the sanctions back into place. And the other thing is we gave them something on the order of $150 billion in sanctions relief. So all this money, almost like an ATM machine gone wild, spewing out all this money to the Iranian dictatorship to buy weapons. 60,000 of the Quds forces, that's their elite forces, are in Syria right now. Who do you think's paying for that? The money derived from the nuclear deal. Their own people are actually picketing in the streets at great risk to themselves in Iran, saying, hey, we want a better life. We want food, medicine, other things. And you're buying weapons to promote terrorism all over the globe with Hezbollah, Hamas, Syria, and, of course, other more moderate Arab states that are also frightening as well. So my hope is, I mean, that's one thing to call that out and say, that deal was a huge mistake. I mean, here's one last thing, then I'll go to another question. While it was being considered, we would have congressional hearings, and administration personnel would come up and testify. And they would say things like, we have an anytime, anywhere agreement, that's what we're going to get, so that we can do on-site inspections anywhere. Before the agreement was signed, the mullahs in Iran said, you're not coming onto our military bases where we're doing testing. You're just not. So I put that into one major speech that I gave on the House floor, laying out they're not going to comply. They're telling us before they sign it. And they get $150 billion plus in relief and cash. Why don't we stay at the drawing board and keep negotiating until we get on-site inspection so we can prove that they're not creating a nuclear capability? And so that's what they did. They signed it, and now we do not have access, nor does the IAEA, which is the UN group that sends inspectors in to their military facilities. Let me go over here, then I'll go right back. Yes.
Just to talk about diplomacy and other issues that we should be worried about. What's your opinion on John Bolton's talk of the Libya model and the Trump administration's general approach towards it?
First of all, in North Korea, our policy for the 8 previous years was known as strategic patience, whatever that is. Hands in pockets, we did very little. As Kim, like his father and like his grandfather before him, especially his father, actively pursued a nuclear weapons capability. We know they have nuclear weapons. The numbers vary, 20, 40, 60, nobody knows how many. They've been working on the means of delivering them, as you know, the ballistic missile testing. Nobody's more worried than Korea itself, South Korea, and Japan, because they're in the line of sight for attack, as well as our military service persons who are there in South Korea and Japan. So there's a great concern about this. I do believe that the inaction, and this goes from George W. Bush, it goes from Bill Clinton especially, who raised the champagne glass like we had succeeded in denuclearizing North Korea, which was a farce. We never pushed human rights there. So the people who might bring and I've had hearings on it myself, I've chaired them, who might push a change of regime, they're all in gulags, being tortured or killed or executed. We should have always had a twin approach of human rights and nuclear, trying to denuclearize the Korean peninsula, especially North Korea. I do think, I don't know where those negotiations are going to go. It's on again, off again, who knows what. I think it's a good thing that the South Korean president keeps meeting and reaching out, and there seems to be a bond there of sorts with Kim Jong-un. But we got to be very concerned about that whole situation because, the first Korean War, you might recall, there was a famous statement made by one of our top diplomats, which some, not all historians, attribute to the elder Kim's invasion of Korea, when he said, Korea is not within our defense perimeter. And they took that in the 50s, early 50s, as a green light that if they invaded, there would be no response in the United States. Like it or not, the greatest thing we can provide to the world is deterrence. That's why I vote for strong military budgets to deter war. Nobody attacks somebody who's a third-degree Taekwondo, karate master. Nobody does. And both my sons have black belts. It really does help. If somebody knows it, they're less likely to attack them. Same, in a macro way, goes for students, for countries. They're less likely to attack a country like South Korea, where there's a clear, predictable response awaiting them. Now, I don't know if it's good sometimes for some of the rhetoric that comes out of the White House, but my whole thing is we have to deter and use every lever at our disposal an attack on South Korea or anywhere else with nuclear weapons. Because again, once those weapons go off, the nuclear fallout goes everywhere, but you'll also have sadly, a lot of loss of life that will be like we've never seen before. So I think we need a tough approach towards Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, and we need to, and the same thing goes with the Iranians, because they took a page out of Iran took it out of North Korea, I should say. During the Clinton administration, again, we gave them all kinds of concessions, and they lied to us. But we didn't have on-site inspections. And I remember one hearing we had during the Clinton administration, and I was there for it. I didn't chair that hearing, but it was a very good hearing. We had the Clinton personnel saying, in 6 months, we're going to check out this spot. I think it's 6 months. If there's not the sense of surprise, or at least a day or 2 or 3, so they don't move things, you're going to find an empty cave. They went 6 months later, found an empty cave, came back toasting, saying they don't have nuclear, they're not trying to develop a nuclear bomb. We all know it's untrue. Look at where they are right today. So Iran looked at that and said, if we can get the same kind of deal, and they got it, we'll be able to produce nuclear weapons, and then they'll announce they're a nuclear weapon state at some point. And if they do it on January 2026, 8 years from now, there's no more sanctions. The agreement says it all goes away. So, we will not be able to say, as a global community, we can't have a nuclear Iran. They are the top terrorist state in the world. Nobody else even comes close. So it's in our interest to be a lot tougher. I'll go back over here, and then I'll go back. There was somebody else. Yes.
So I was wondering if you could speak about the status of Congress as an institution. Are members trying to persuade each other about ideas and issues? Or is everybody sort of
That's a great question. Question is, are people trying to work together for solutions, or is it echo chamber? Everybody's at each other's throats? I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
I would say, every bill and law that I've ever written, I reach across the aisle, I find a Democrat who I can work with, who will work with me, we work together. For instance, our newest trafficking law, and if it passes, it'll be the 5th one. It's called the Frederick Douglass Anti-Human Trafficking Bill. I reached out to a member of the Democrat Party who I know cares deeply about trafficking, Karen Bass from California, and we worked together, we did press conferences together, we even had descendants of Frederick Douglass, the slave who escaped to freedom. He was born 200 years ago in 1818, and I thought, what a perfect time to say, this is modern-day slavery, but I did it bipartisan way. It's the only way you get things done. When the Democrats did Obamacare with no Republican input, they got a seriously flawed outcome, and when we do that, on the Republican side, just try to jam something through, you get something that, you want bipartisan eyes and ears, lots of hearings to figure out what the flaws might be, and then move forward with legislation to the greatest extent possible where there's a consensus. And it's more likely that law will survive the test of time as well. Every one of the caucuses I do, we reach out across the aisle. I do think bipartisanship, and when there's a difference, frankly, Congress is a marketplace of ideas, disagree. That's great. But do it in a civil fashion, like I said at the beginning. And we've lost a lot of that. Hopefully it comes back soon. Yes.
What is
We are reacting. We're reacting aggressively. The Rohingya is a terrible, terrible killing of Muslims. It's, Burma is not a country where you have a democracy, and unfortunately, we've had hearings on it. We've had legislation on the floor to try to beef up the efforts to provide refugee protection for the Rohingya people. So there's no doubt there's been a totally bipartisan effort on that one, getting back to that earlier question, because, and we just had a bill on the floor a week ago on the Rohingya to try to help them. So, yes, we're working on that one, yes. Well, my belief is, it's a strongly held belief. In 2008, President Obama, he was then Senator Obama, spoke at a Saddleback church, and I was in the front row, like these guys, ladies, can't see you guys. And Barack Obama was asked a question about marriage. Define marriage was the question put forward to him. And he said, I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. And he said, and God is in the mix. That was from Senator Barack Obama. Now, he has changed. He now supports same-sex marriage. My belief is squarely where his used to be, that marriage is between a man and a woman. And on adoption is all about the best interest of the child. Now, there are people who feel the best interest of the child is for gay couples to adopt. I really believe that best interest, you find a home where they're more likely, the home study that is done takes in all kinds of factors, and I would vote the same way, frankly, as I did then. But there's something that's happened that there's little concern from the LGBT community, which I find disconcerting. And that is that a lot of the best organizations for adoption have been put out of business because of their refusal, like in D.C., to facilitate such adoptions. Catholic Charities, which is one of the greatest humanitarian organizations in the United States for poor, for disabled, and for adoptions, they have been now denied the ability to do any adoptions in D.C., in Illinois, in Massachusetts, and in some other states, because they believe best interest of the child is not that kind of adoption. So. No, we have waiting periods for families to adopt children, often by years, but certainly long waiting periods of couples who would love to adopt, but the child is simply not available. And on adoption, I'll give an example of one of the reasons why I voted against the tax bill that was just up. Not only did the SALT provisions, where our deductions locally would be capped at $10,000, and that was the primary reason, but early on, there was an elimination of the adoption tax credit. Now, why is that important? In 1989, I introduced legislation, totally bipartisan. I had 100 co-sponsors on my bill to provide for adoption via a tax credit of $5,000 for what we call non-recurring expenses. And those expenses are the kind that somebody says, oh, I want to adopt, but I just don't have the wherewithal. Tax credits are dollars in your pocket. It's not a deduction. It's dollar for dollar. It's now about just under $14,000 as a credit. When the Contract for America came up, led by Republicans, I put the tax credit into that big omnibus bill, and it's been the law of the land ever since. I'm very, very aggressively pro-adoption, and when our leadership put an elimination of the tax credit for adoption into the tax cut bill, I led an effort, did a letter, met with the speaker, met with everyone else involved, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and was able to get that off the cutting block. So I do think adoption is but large numbers of Americans now go overseas because there is a dearth of children. Many are willing to take sibling groups, which is great, and those with special needs are also being adopted, you know, in large numbers. So, yes.
What's your stance on immigration and border control policy?
Question, I missed the last part. Immigration and
border control policy.
On immigration, I believe that we need to enact legislation to protect the so-called DACA kids, who are now, some of them, you know, they're not kids anymore, but they came here through no fault of their own. And to deport them, I think, would be wrong in the extreme. They're part of our community. They're working. They're in schools everywhere. We need to have their backs. And there is legislation that we're trying to get on the floor right now. Even the president is calling for it, and calling for it strongly, to fix that part of our immigration problem. I do believe that a wall is needed. I'm not sure how much, but I have to tell all of you, in the year 2006, we had legislation on the floor of the House, became law, was signed into law, called the Secure Fence Act. You can Google it and read all about it. It's really, well, Hillary Clinton voted for it. Barack Obama, as a senator, voted for it. Many of the liberals in the House and Senate voted for it, because it is a way of trying to stop those who are running drugs, engaging in human trafficking. The gangs are a problem, without a doubt, and that's a problem here in our state. It's not going to stop everyone, but a wall could be a deterrent. I do believe we need more border security agents. I think that's a necessity. And, you know, you or I, if we tried to go to Mexico or some other country, good luck. You know, you wouldn't be allowed to stay there except on you know, for a very limited stay. But I do think the DACA problem, which is still festering, people don't know what needs to be fixed. In the back?
My sister is gay, and she's talked about like wanting to adopt a child one day with her partner. And I just wanted to know if you think that based on medical studies, she would be less of a legitimate parent, and why she couldn't have.
Well, again, you know, the issue legally is moot at this point, especially with the Supreme Court decision, and she's free to adopt.
Right, but why do you think she shouldn't be able to adopt a child?
Well, I think you're getting to, you know, I do believe that there are many others who would like to adopt, who can acquire a child. As I said, the waiting periods are extremely long. And
Okay, so what makes that more different than your sister? Those other people waiting for time?
well, you know, in my opinion, a child, you know, needs every possibility of, you know, somebody mentioned orphanages before. I mean, orphanages are still a possibility for some kids, but
Congressman Smith, I just wanted to know if you could interject. Last night, HBO debuted the documentary about John McCain, about John McCain and his life, his career. I just was hoping maybe you could share with our students like a personal anecdote or story about American hero John McCain and what he's meant, just so they can connect kind of your accomplishment to somebody who's now on the national stage and dealing with cancer and everything like that.
well, you know, John McCain, in my opinion, is a national hero. He spent many years in Hanoi Hilton, and you know, I actually went to Hanoi on a POWMIE trip and saw what the Hanoi Hilton looked like, but obviously it didn't look like now what it looks like then. They called it that as a euphemism. It was a terrible place of torture, and like our other service members who were taken there, he endured, overcame, and then became a great House member. And in fact, I sat next to him when he was still in the House and Foreign Affairs Committee. Then went on to the Senate, and now, you know, unfortunately, he's not doing well. But John McCain is a true national hero. You know, and he speaks his mind. He's not willing, you know, not unwilling, I should say, to disagree with his own party when he believes it. And I think that's a good thing. I wish more people did that. I do it. I wish more people would do it. You know, to think independently. But he's almost like a one-of-a-kind type of guy.
Thank you.
He's amazing.
So you said you were working with OSEC, right? The European Security Commission?
Yes.
So what actions have you taken to alleviate the human rights crisis currently occurring in Chechnya with regards to LGBT rights and human trafficking and general networks of place?
In Chechnya, when there was a terrible killing, targeting of LGBT individuals for execution and torture, I co-sponsored a bill that called them out for it, because violence against anyone is just absolutely unacceptable. And same thing when there was problems in Uganda with that terrible targeting of individuals. I not only spoke out, wrote a letter to President Museveni, taking him to task on that. We have passed a resolution, and again, I was one of the co-sponsors of that resolution in the House of Representatives.
What are your thoughts on current news and media outlets in the United States? Current news and media outlets.
I wish they'd get more objective. I really wish, everything would have a slant to it, the way it does, sadly, in many of our major networks. What they choose not to cover. And I can give you an example, just right here. I sometimes have to do workarounds with some of our news media. I'm leading the effort on Lyme disease. Today, this morning, front page picture of Lyme, 2 big stories in the Trenton Times of Trenton. Big editorial, never mentioned. We sent all of our stuff, the new bill calls for a national strategy, similar to what I did with the autism effort, because I just took that as a template and said, it worked there, it's going to work here as well, so that we really all get on the same page in combating Lyme disease, and I'm not even mentioned. So I have a call into the editor, and I'm going to, politely say, what gives? And on the national scale, I think there needs to be more objectivity. There just has to be more objectivity. If you watch Fox, you get one. You watch MSNBC, you get another. You put the 2 side by side, or CNN, they don't even come close. So I think we need to get to a better place of hard-nosed news. Just tell the news. Save the editorial for the editorial page and for the commentary page. We're out of time. I want to thank you so much for your questions.